Yeah. Let's do in the news for a bit if we can. So as we were looking at in the news, obviously I've put you some verses up to tell you some of the categories of what we're studying. He causes both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave to receive a mark to the right hand and on their forehead. So we talk about the New World Order. The New World Order is watching everything start to come together under one leader. That's exactly what's going to happen in Revelation. We may not see that leader coming in. He may be alive if we're living in the last days, but we know that things are starting to bottleneck, not only economically, but politically and socially. And so that's what this category is about. As we go on, let me just tell you this one that happened this week. So some of them seem innocuous, but I want you to know that all these little things start to show us an ambiance of what's happening in our world. Take this, for example. This is an article that happened this week. Packers unveil a strange American flag-like banner before Sunday's game. How many of you saw this? This is kind of shocking. Is this the new socialist flag of America? Is this the new communist flag of America? It makes you wonder. As Sunday Green Bay Packers game kicked off, fans were perplexed when the stylized version of the American flag that looks more like a decorative bunting than our actual national flag was paraded out onto the field for a pregame ceremony. By the way, if you rearrange the flag in any way or mark it in any way, it's against our Constitution. And so this is definitely not an American flag. It's a travesty. The strange banner caused ESPN's Bob Domovsky to remark, "Not sure what country today's Packers-Bills game is being played in, but that's not my flag." The odd vexillological display brought many fans to wonder if they should stand or take a knee for the weird banner. Let me remind you that 10, 15, 20 years ago, you would never see something like that. So we're watching our world change socially. We're watching it change in allegiance. We're seeing this globalization coming, and it's hitting even in America. Let me give you another one for the New World Order. The algorithm that could send you to prison, take your kids, or crash your car. So we're living in an age of algorithms, and a lot of people don't know what they are. Simply put, an algorithm is a computer program that very quickly goes through a ton of data to come up with the best scenario in a situation. I guess I said that the best way. An algorithm chooses which music you listen to, and Spotify, which is an app for music, does a pretty good job. A faulty algorithm might force you to listen to a gangster rap instead of a country song, not the biggest deal. So an algorithm does this. They know what songs you're listening to on say, an app like Spotify, so they give you the next songs, or they suggest them based on your likes. That's an algorithm. But what happens when an algorithm for a self-driving car has to decide between hitting a group of pedestrians or plunging itself and you off a cliff? The algorithm becomes a matter of life and death. Before you get in a self-driving car, you'll want to know a little bit about the algorithm. What kind of split-second decisions has it been programmed to make? And remember, algorithms are programmed by people. And so that decision may seem like it's coming from a computer-based program, but it's coming from a person who programmed that computer. And who exactly wrote it? Remember, algorithms still have a human component, and humans are inherently biased. The subjective opinions will inevitably make it into the algorithm. When an algorithm convicts the defendant in a murder trial, which by the way, they're happening to do that right now, that too is life or death. Some child protective services use an algorithm to decide which kids to take out of homes. The algorithm assigns a risk score based on inputs and how many calls the department has received, and if the parents are hostile towards the caseworkers. So obviously you're seeing the human element even behind the algorithm, but taken out of the situation and the scene. And whenever you take the human element out of a situation, it's going to be a hard, fast rule, which is really not going to be fair. It says this article writer said this: if I smoked a joint or got in a fight in high school, am I 40% more likely to commit a crime? Well, an algorithm would say he was. Will I be assumed guilty based on probability alone? How can I be sure the algorithm isn't biased? In the criminal justice system, due process might be replaced by computer processors, but the benefits of algorithms cannot take precedence over due process. The American system of justice was designed to be open and transparent, so much so for what we're seeing today in our news. Whether the witness against you is a human or an algorithm, transparency and due process is non-negotiable. So when I talk about that one world order, and we're living in a time when things are changing, obviously we're watching computers take a huge swath out of the reality of being human, and we're watching things such as the AIs and Sophias I showed you before start to make decisions that should be human-based. Let me give you another one. Trump sets sees vindication in new trade deal with Canada and Mexico. So in our news, we have a whole lot of news about the Judge Kavanaugh. We have a whole lot of news about well, not so much since the judge has taken over the news than the Mueller investigation, but we fail to hear any of the things that Trump has done. And so I want to tell you a couple things right now, and then I want to tell you several of the 81 things he's done so far in office. Trump sees vindication in new trade deal with Canada and Mexico. President Trump on Monday checked off a major campaign promise that seemed impossible when he made it, rewriting the 14-year-old North American Free Trade Agreement with Canada and Mexico. So it's rewritten, it's done, it's favorable to the United States, and you hear nothing about it on our news. And so that's typical of what we're seeing in our biased news. Here's another one. Let's go on a little bit further and tell you a little bit about Israel. That's, by the way, as an algorithm. That's just was in that article. That's what it shows. Here's Israel. So we know, Matthew chapter 24, Jesus tells us in verse 32 to learn the parable of the fig tree, that when the fig tree puts forth its fruit, know that summer's nigh. That is a reference to Israel, represented by the fig. They still are. Israel becoming a nation. So we know since 1948, we should be looking. Jesus also told that the signs of the times will be seen by this generation that sees Israel blossom. So you're the generation. I'm the generation that's seen her blossom. I was born after 1948, but we're still the generation seeing her blossom. And so we should be seeing the signs of the times. So when we look at Israel, we want to know what's happening. And by the way, Israel, I've told you this before, is the size of Connecticut. It's a very small country. It makes world headlines 360 to 362 days of a year on average. Now, could you imagine Connecticut making the news that many times? So Israel is definitely something that's in the center of everyone's thoughts. A whopping 7,000 faces and hundreds of flags of every color painted Israel's capital on Thursday, parading through the streets in 2008 Jerusalem March. The diverse participants decked out on September 27th in costumes representing their respective nations had one thing in common: a love of Israel and the Jewish people. I am proud of Israel and I love Israel, Brazilian Lilas Alves told Jerusalem News. I came to bless my family, bless me, bless my home and my life. And we know what Scripture says: I will bless those that bless you and I will curse those that curse you. According to David Parsons, Vice President and Senior International Spokesman for the event, around 60% of this feast, 6,000 people, in addition to 1,000 Christian Zionists, that means Messianic Jews, took part in the march and are part of the feast that came from Latin America, Africa, Asia. The largest delegation of about 1,000 people came from Brazil. So when we hear about about the Lord regathering Israel, we think many times of Israelis coming from all parts of the world, and they are. But he's also regathering the nations. So we're watching people support Israel. It's an amazing spot. When you go to Israel, if you ever go to Israel, you feel it instantly at home. You feel that you're supposed to be there, especially if you're a Christian. And so that's not given by some type of rhetoric. That's given deep down inside. Israel is where the home church was. It's where it started. And so participants enjoy dynamic music and dance performances, hear messages from well-known evangelists. They raised $20 million for Israel, by the way. And they were all major sessions were translated to 12 languages simultaneously. It's almost like the book of Acts. And so we're watching Israel burgeon with not just Jews coming to that from all over, but also Christians who are supporting Israel. Israel stands on very firm ground biblically. When you hear about people talking about replacement theology, they'll take Christians are talking about that in America. It's really blasphemous. What they're saying is that anything that was promised to Israel in the Old Testament, the church replaces that. That is not true. Let me tell you how it breaks down. Jehovah God is married to Israel. He's told her that many times. Hosea talks about Hosea having a wife that was a prostitute and she left. It's symbolic of Israel leaving God. And so God is still married to Israel. He has promises he's given to them, and he will never go back on those promises. You and I are Christians. We're saved. Christ is married to us. So Jehovah is married to Israel. Christ is married to us. We are the fulfillment. Jesus said he came not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. And I'll show you that in another article. And so we are the fulfillment. Paul says, don't forget Israel. The axe is laid to the root, but don't forget the root. You are adopted in. You are born again, adopted into the promises of God. And so we don't replace Israel. We are two separate entities that are being dealt with by God. How many are still with me tonight? So that's about the best way I can give you that. So let me tell you a little bit more about it. At the UN, Netanyahu reveals a hidden nuclear site and a prophecy of what's going on. So Netanyahu has done this. When Obama was, and I'll just paraphrase what's going on, when Obama was making his deal with Iran, and he was talking about, and he gave $150 billion to them and flew them over in jets, the cash money, and was making this nuclear deal, he said that, they were going to not produce any nuclear centrifuges, or they weren't going to touch the U-235 atom. They were going to do all these things. They took the Atomic Energy Commission, said that they were going to police them and show it. Well, Netanyahu came up, he had found 10,000 documents. They had raided 10,000 documents from Iran, and he warned the world when that was going on that they have a nuclear site that's deep underneath Tehran. Well, they ignored him. Now he has come into the UN. He's showing pictures, as a matter of fact. He's found that his Mossad, which is far better than the CIA, believe it or not, have found another nuclear site where they are actually producing nuclear weapons. And he says the world's not listening to him. He said the only one that's listening is President Trump. He's the only one listening. He says the rest of the world in Europe are turning a deaf ear to it. That's the whole thing he says this. He says, in May, we exposed the site of Iran's secret atomic archive right here in the Shor Abad district of Tehran. Today, I'm revealing the site of a second facility, Iran's secret atomic warehouse, where they're stockpiling warheads. It's right here in the Turquoise Abad district of Tehran, just 3 miles away. He applauded America's reimposition of sanctions against Tehran and aimed a shot at Europeans' appeasement as the European Union tries to circumvent the issue. So we're watching a whole lot of things happen, and believe me, Trump knows what's going on, and he may be one of the only leaders in the world that understands what's going on in Israel, especially according to Netanyahu. I want to let you know that there's another article I want to read to you here. It's how a dangerous game between Israel and Hamas might spark a war. You got to listen closely to this because it gets a little bit entangled. A recent surge in incendiary terror and border violence in Hamas's way of pressuring Israel to renew talks regarding a wide-scale agreement mediated by the Egyptians. So what Hamas wants to do, which is a ruling party in the Palestinian territory, is they were having. Remember, they had that march. They went to the fence. They were flying kites then there would be a flame, and they would land in Israel, flaming kites. They were putting tires to fire. They were doing everything they possibly could. Well, Abbas, who is the leader of Palestinian area, is the president. Well, Hamas and Abbas do not get along. And let me tell you why. Hamas is the ruling party is telling Abbas, and I'm just short-circuiting what this says, that he needs to appeal to Israel and go for a peace process with Israel because Israel pays the Palestinian civil workers. They pay the people that are working, the governmental workers in Palestine, the Hamas workers. Well, Israel's not paying them anymore. And so they want Abbas to have a peace. Abbas is saying, I want your guerrilla warfare, I want your army to back me. They're saying no. So we're watching Gaza fall apart. And by the way, if you've been in Israel and you've been to Section C or Section A or Section B, you realize how depressed it is, how absolutely it's not being policed at all. And now it's getting even worse. I can't imagine it being worse, but it's going to be worse because there's a loggerhead going on between Hamas and Abbas. And that's exactly what this is talking about. So they're fighting back and forth. These are Islamic Arabs against Islamic Arabs. And so I thought about a scripture verse for you. Genesis 16, verse 12 says this. It's talking about Ishmael, who's the father of all Arabs, by the way. And they actually believe that Abraham was sacrificing Ishmael on Mount Moriah, not Isaac. And so every Arab comes from Ishmael. It says this about him. And he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. So that's exactly what's happening in Israel. By the way, the Israelis are relatives of the Arabs. Obviously, if Ishmael and Abraham were brothers, they're relatives. And so this is exactly what's happening right now in Israel. Well, there's some good news on the home front. Let me give you this one about Israel. Texas schools to teach Arab rejection of Israel, prolonging the conflict. The state of Texas will require schools to teach that Arab rejection of the state of Israel has led to the ongoing conflict in the Middle East and nothing else. You got to give a hand to Texas. They're saying, we don't care what the world says. We know why there's trouble there. It's good. By the way, there are textbooks that are being printed and are used by approximately 5.4 million public school children. The boards comprised that did this. The boards comprised of 5 Democratic members and 10 Republican members, and they pushed it through the Texas school system, and now it's going to be taught. They should teach the truth, they said, and truth is Arab rejection, said Jacobs. At the same time, they should explain to students what Arab narrative and how the Arabs are wrong for going against Israel. So, pretty powerful statement. Let me give you a little bit more about the economy. So for months, I've been telling you about cashless society. I've been telling you about digital currency. I've been telling you about one worldism. I've been telling you about nations that have been falling. And so this happened in Canada this week. One of Canada's largest banks, it's called it reminds us of the dangers of a cashless society. Yesterday, it's actually 2 days ago, CIBC, which is the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, reported a systems issue that prevented customers from logging into their accounts online for the entire business day. It just happened to be the day that people received welfare, unemployment benefits, social insurance payments like Social Security, Canada pension payments, and disability payments that landed in the accounts of the recipients. They landed there by direct deposit. Customers could still use ATMs and point-of-sale features, but were unable to log on to their accounts to check balances. So when you talk about electronic transfers and doing all your money business online, they could not make any transaction online, which means they couldn't pay any of their bills that were due that day. They couldn't do a thing. And nobody was telling them when they could get back online. Their monies were pretty much frozen for that day. Now, the system was restored around 8 p.m. Last night, but that wasn't soon enough for people who wanted to pay their bills by the due date or make business transactions. Imagine businesses not being able to transfer money or do anything. Meanwhile, CIBC wants to move everything online. So ironically, this online banking catastrophe occurred a day after Victor Dodidge, which is the CEO, predicted that nearly all transactions would soon be taking place online. He has quotes here saying that right now there's about 87% of people that are using the online transactions. He predicts that it's going to be 96% in his bank. And then the article goes on to say, here's why. It's not because he says people prefer it. It's not that the reason why people prefer it. The reason is they have no choice. They're closing down all their branch offices that you can walk into and make monetary transactions back and forth. So they're eliminating their bank offices, their local offices, so that the only thing you can do is go online. Imagine how frustrating it is when you call a bank, and you've done it, and you get an automated teller on that phone. They put you through a series of numbers to try to. That's exactly what's happening to banks, and he's making it happen in Canada, so that when people are part of this banking system, they will not have a person to talk to. There won't be an ability to change cash back and forth to hands. So that's how it's going to happen, not because people prefer it, but because banks are going to push us that way, and that's exactly what's happening. It's a scary thing, but it's happening. Let me give you this one about war. It says, and basically we know that there's a place called Armageddon, which is the last great war, but obviously there's wars that are leading up to that. So this happens this week. Iran warns Israel and the United States to expect devastating revenge. The deputy head of Iran's Revolutionary Guards, Hossein Salami, and I really do think he should change his last name, warned Israel and U.S. leaders of expecting a devastating response from Iran, as reported by Reuters. In a speech before the funeral of the victims in Ahvaz, broadcast live on the state television, he accused them of involvement in Saturday's attack on a military parade in the city of Ahvaz that killed 25 people. Now here's where misinformation comes in. There was an attack on that parade. 25 people were killed. One of them was a 4-year-old boy. But it was there. He's blaming, Iran is blaming America, and they're blaming Israel. And they're saying they're going to do something about it. But we know that as soon as the attack happened, the Ahvaz National Resistance tweeted out that they did the attack. They are anti-Iran. They are against their own nation. These are Islamics that are against them because they're seeing the abuse of their own people by Bashar al-Assad. They're seeing him by Bashar al-Assad in Syria. They're seeing by Rouhani in Iran. So they're seeing the abuse of their people, and they attacked their own people. It was a terrorist group inside. Netanyahu said this when they told him what they were saying. He said, that's absolutely ridiculous that we would do. He said, if we did it, we would tell you we did it. And so basically we're watching that Middle East continue to have turmoil. Remember I told you that verse? His hand will be against his brother. There'll be his hand, every one of them. And that's what's happening. It's a cesspool of just anger that's going over and over again. I don't want to report this to you, but I'm going to. Some of you may be a fan of this man, but I am an equal opportunity reporter. Religion. If any man shall say unto you, lo is the Christ, believe it not. So when we talk about religion, we want to talk about Christianity. American Christianity is in trouble. I'm going to tell you that right now. Progressive Christianity is all over the place, and it's in trouble. American Christianity is losing its fiber, it's losing its morals, it's losing its anchors, because we're starting to talk away the Bible. Case in point, this came out this week. Mega pastor, 10 commandments no longer applicable. And I'm going to add to this in a moment. So Andy Stanley, how many ever heard of Andy Stanley? 34,000 people go to his church. Now just listen so you can understand what's going on here, so you can understand the problems that are here. And again, I'm not somebody to bash a pastor. Last time I said something about this, somebody wrote to me and said, how dare you say that? Listen, I am not judging anybody. I'm telling you what someone said. It's a fact. And the Bible does say that we're to judge among ourselves. That's not judge not lest you be judged. That's Matthew. Judge not lest you be judged. The word is krisis. In the Greek it says don't send anyone to hell. Don't tell anybody they're going to go to hell. That's the judgment you can't do. But it does say judge among yourselves. The prophets should be judged among yourselves. That's not sending them to hell. That's saying why are you saying this? Why are you doing this? It's against Scripture. How many get that? So Andy Stanley asserts Jesus gave one new law as a replacement for everything. Now listen closely, because he is really a proponent of progressive Christianity, and it's not good. Mega pastor of one of the largest evangelical churches in the United States is attacking the Old Testament again, this time insisting Jesus rendered the 10 Commandments null and void, issuing one new law as a replacement for everything. And you know where he's going with this, so I'll read it to you. Andy Stanley pastored the 34,000-member North Point Community Church in suburban Atlanta, who famously advised his flock to unhitch from the Old Testament in a sermon last spring, has now penned an article promoting his new book, saying laws such as thou shalt have no other gods before me and thou shalt not kill are no longer relevant to Christians living in the New Covenant era. You've heard this story I'm quoting before. A group of Christians puts up a monument of the 10 Commandments in a public space or on governmental property, begins Stanley in his article entitled, Why Do Christians Want to Post the 10 Commandments and Not the Sermon on the Mount? Stanley goes on to write that the 10 Commandments are from the Old Covenant, the Old Testament, which he says played a significant role in God's creation of the nation of Israel. It gave them moral guidelines and helped separate this new nation from their neighbors. This was part of the formal agreement or covenant God created with his people. But Jesus' death and resurrection, he says, signaled the end of that covenant and all the rules and regulations associated with it. That is not true. And I'm going to tell you how it's not true. Jesus didn't issue his new commandment, he says, as an additional commandment to the existing list of commandments. Jesus issued his new commandment as a replacement for everything in the existing 10 commandments. Well, here's my take. Andy Stanley does not know a thing about his Bible. He's biblically illiterate. He's saying that Jesus said, love one another, that's the new commandment I give to you. And Stanley's saying that erases the 10 commandments. Let me tell you what Jesus actually said, because you got to go to the Word, not to somebody's opinion. The Word says this. Jesus said, think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. Jesus was giving us the 10 commandments in 2 commandments. The first thing he did, he says, love God with all your heart and all your strength and all your mind. That's the first 5 commandments, by the way. The second was love your neighbor as yourself. The second 5 commandments have to do with your neighbor. He was not replacing them. He was putting them into 2 commandments, saying, those are the 10 commandments you still have to follow. So Andy Stanley is way, way off. And you know what? How many people walked out of his church when he did that? None. And you know what that tells me? We're in a world of hurt. Today I went online just to hear about another pastor who has a 10,000 member congregation in Harlem. And he's on the news. He's being slammed also by some conservative pastors. He's telling people, and I heard him from his own words because he was televised. He says that he's tired of this thinking that Christians have that Jesus is the only way to heaven. And he said that, and by the way, he said this and he kept going and he said, there are lots of ways. God, he said, Jesus didn't even believe that. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man gets to God except through him. So they're rewriting it because of their own feelings. He says, here's what I feel. And every time you hear that, you better be careful, because our feelings lie to us. He says, I feel that we've separated ourselves because of this. We should be all getting along together. There's lots of paths. As long as you believe in God, you're going to heaven. That's called pantheism. Every way is a way to God. It is an error. I'm really concerned about American Christians. You know why? Because most of that congregation clapped for him. If I was in that congregation, I would have started an uproar. I'm telling you, I would have got up, they would have had to throw me out. because it's terrible. It's leading people astray. It's giving them a false hope. Jesus is the only way. There is no other way. Listen, when Islam says that God has no son, that's a blasphemy. Jesus, if that's the case, then why did Jesus die for us? How many are with me tonight? Aren't you glad you're getting the right truth? And by the way, it's not my opinion, it's the Word of God. I don't know, I'm getting really concerned. How many are getting concerned a little bit? Speaking of being concerned, listen to what happened to Franklin Graham, who I know is a great man, by the way. England's largest Muslim group wants Franklin Graham banned from preaching. So Franklin Graham is going to be doing some revivals in England, and they've gotten together. It's the Muslim Council of Britain, MCB, and they've petitioned the Parliament and members of the public to deny Graham a visa for spreading what the organization calls hate speech. You know why? Because he tells the truth. He tells the truth about Islam. And so can you imagine if they did something like that to a speaker of Islam? What would happen if we said we want to ban him? So we're watching Christians get bashed. And by the way, it's a sign of the times when you see it. On the website Jihad Watch, writer Robert Spencer asks, would anyone be calling for the banning of Graham from the UK if he had called Christianity evil? Absolutely not. It's just because of Islam. So let's go on, because it doesn't get any better. This talks about this. It says, because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. And obviously we're seeing that love grow cold quite a bit. So I'll bring you to this article this week. Anybody see anything a little different in that picture? Okay, that is not a woman. That's a man who identifies as a woman because he feels like a woman. Now, I am not going to tell you that I don't have compassion for somebody that's like that. I think that there's a lot of mix-up going on there and they need help. Let me say amen. So I'm not aggressive against them. I'm aggressive in the fact to think that we have to accept that as normal. Are you with me? Listen to the article. A roundup of a few of the latest developments in the cultural wars. The Daily Beast is reporting that New York City is set to allow a gender-neutral option on birth certificates. So listen, it's a policy that does not appear to be thought through. So now you can have a gender option on your birth certificate. You can go back, if you identify as a woman and you're a man, you can go back and have your birth certificate changed to a female. Wait. A new bill in New York City will soon allow non-binary people born in the 5 boroughs to obtain a gender-neutral X on their birth certificate. So not only do we have transgenders, or people who feel that they're a woman and they're a man, and I understand the problems there. I understand the complexity of that, and I have a heart for people who have that problem. I really do. But now you can be gender-neutral, which means you're not a male or a female. I'm starting to think that I live on a different planet. Just listen to this, it goes on. Cleared by the City Council this Wednesday, introducing 954A, now he heads to Mayor Bill de Blasio, who announced the legislation alongside City Council Speaker Corey Johnson in June for a formal signature. It says this, the bill makes it easier for transgender people born in New York City to change their sex listed on their birth certificates. But it also specifically permits an X option for those who identify as neither strictly male nor strictly female. So you can actually, if you don't feel like you're a male and you don't feel like you're a female, you can be an X. Unsurprisingly, this is being hailed as a major victory for non-binary people, and adds New York City to a growing list of jurisdictions that are now allowing the neither option in the gender column. So this man feels like he's a woman, so he's playing on a woman's basketball team. I have a couple problems with that. Number one, what if your daughter is playing against him and there's no, I mean, does anybody see a difference there? Okay, it's not just me, does it, is it? But the thing is that what if your daughter was the MVP and this guy joined the team? Obviously, he's going to rebound a little bit better than her. What do you think? And so we're seeing, now here's the other problem. This article goes on to say that the schools in New York City are now passing a law that if this year you feel like you're a female, you can play on the female team this year. But next year, if you feel like you're a male, you can play on the male team. This is getting really messed up. A Canadian sports writer, oh, by the way, let's talk about the hospitals for a second. If your birth certificate says an X or non-binary, and you go to a hospital and they don't know what's wrong with you, it's really beneficial if they know if you're a female or a male. I don't want to be operated on as a female if I'm a male. I want my parts. I don't want them taken out. How many of you understand what I'm talking about? A Canadian sports organization has decided to ruin university athletics in order to pander to the transgender crowd. a move that will soon irreparably transform the playing field for reasons so obvious that only trans activists could be offended by them, such as the physical differences between biological males and females. Canada's media, of course, is dutifully cheerleading this move. Here's from the province, and this is a quote: "A new policy allowing Canadian transgender student athletes to compete on teams consistent with their gender identity and without hormone therapy is a welcome change. But more can still be done to make athletics inclusive of gender diversity," says a Vancouver trans athlete consultant. U Sports, which governs university athletics in Canada, puts this new policy into effect Thursday and says it today, and says it affects student athletes at all 56 member institutions. Athletes can only compete on teams of one gender during a given academic year, so I told you, and the policy doesn't require them to undertake hormone therapy. They must also comply with a Canadian anti-doping program. So how many remember the Olympics and Russians? The Russians in the Olympics, all the women that usually compete in the Olympics looked like men because they were taking testosterone. Well, they were thrown out. Whenever they got a medal, it was taken away from them. You're going to have to give the medals back. Listen, for me, it's a step in the right direction, this one says, Kay Scott, principal partner of the Trans Force Consulting, which works with organizations addressing gender inclusion issues. I think these kinds of policies are really important. I'll bet you do. This one in particular is great for certain transgender student athletes in that they can select a team or division that aligns with their gender identity. So you can, I feel like a female this year because I think I can do really well on that female team. And so you can play there. Now listen, levels of testosterone linked to muscle mass and increased strength have been a key issue in debate over allowing trans athletes to compete in events consistent with their gender identity. Scott said he also approves U Sports' allowance of transgender athletes to play in a category consistent with their sex assigned to birth. He says, yeah, you can play on this team if you're a female and you think you're a female and you've been born a female, you can play there. Well, thank you. Thank you, I could play on a girls' team if I was born a girl. Thank you. But if you're a man and you think you're a girl, you can also play on that team. You listening to me tonight? All right. But he's critical of the policy's absence of language to include non-binary athletes. So he's saying, but you know what? We're not going far enough. We should be able to have non-binary athletes play there. Somebody said, well, we're going to have non-binary teams. Do you get this? Because I can't wrap my head around this. I don't understand. So you're going to have a boys team, which could have girls on it that identify as boys. You're going to have a girls team, which could have men on it that identify as girls. And you can have a non-binary team, which they don't know who they are. I can't wait to see the Olympics in 4 years when should the Lord tarry. It's getting very strange. Somebody say it's getting very strange. It really is. All right, let me give you a little bit more. This is from The Planet. This is what says in Scripture, and there will be great earthquakes, mega earthquakes in various places, and famines and pestilence, and there will be fearful sights and great signs from heaven. A sign of the times, Jesus said. Somebody once told me, actually they said it, and I was preaching in a large church, and the guy stood up and said, there's always been earthquakes. Of course there's always been earthquakes. What Jesus was talking about was he was talking in diverse places, different places, and that they were going to increase in strength. In the last 20 years, earthquakes have taken a massive hit upwards. In the last 100 years, they've been there's more severity of earthquakes in your lifetime than there ever has been before, and we've been seeing it happen right now. The 7.5 magnitude earthquake and tsunami that hit the Indonesian island of Sulawesi last week has so far racked up a death toll of 1,350 people. It occurred thousands of miles away from the island. It should be taken as a lesson for those living on the West Coast, specifically Washington and California, and I'll show you why in a moment. Authorities are still expecting the death toll from the Indonesian earthquake to climb much, much higher in the coming weeks as those living on the island in Sulawesi grapple with the aftermath of the disaster. By the way, right after the 7.5 earthquake, there was a 6.9 earthquake. They keep getting those and they get lesser and lesser. 6.9 is devastating. But Washington State is expected to be hit with a far larger earthquake. They're calling for a 9.5 earthquake in Washington State. I was a little child when the earthquake, which was a 6.5, hit Alaska, in Anchorage, Alaska, and I saw the pictures. It was devastating. This is way far greater than anything we've ever experienced. That earthquake would likely come from the Cascadian subduction zone, which runs from northern California to southern British Columbia. Not only would there be a large earthquake, but the resulting tsunami would be 4 times the height of the 20-foot waves that struck Sulawesi. So an 80-foot wave, that means that San Francisco would be gone, Los Angeles would be gone, Seattle Seattle would be gone. All those coastal cities. Police are guarding shops against looters in Indonesia. People are desperately searching for food, fuel, and water. And you know what the police are doing? They're allowing them to break into, this article says, they're allowing them to break into shops to get food. That's it, because the people are starving because of this. With all the natural disasters causing untold devastation across the globe, many in danger zones are simply not prepared should something occur in their area. In fact, the United States as a whole takes a culture of preparedness, laying all their survival hopes on the government responses. Government is not going to help you in that type of situation. A magnitude 9.5 rupture on the Cascadia earthquake fault line will likely cut all electricity, running water, and sewer services for months and maybe even a year. Basic preparations to survive without power and running water should be priority for those who are in the immediate disaster area. Those who have prepared even minimally face much better in the aftermath of a natural disaster from those who don't. So the article had this picture with it, and so I'm going to do something, and I'm going to tell you something. If you want to find out where the earthquakes are in the world, you can go to something called the seismic monitor. Now, the seismic monitor is maintained every day, and it shows you earthquakes all around the world. And this one is showing you some earthquakes right here. This is Indonesia. This is where the big one hit. That's the same place where Sumatra in 2006 rang an 8.5 earthquake, and it shook the earth on its axis. It could be seen from space. So this is what's called the Ring of Fire. It goes all the way here down the Aleutian Islands of Alaska, down the western coast of Canada, uninhabited, by the way, on the western coast of Canada, down to the very inhabited west coast of the United States, down along the Baja, down to the Yucatan Peninsula, and all the way down to the western coast of South America, which is Argentina and Peru. So this is the Ring of Fire. It's a subduction zone, which means this: the Earth keeps folding in on itself. That's where the fault lines come. It just keeps going underneath, constantly moving. And so we see when earthquakes happen, and you can see the red ones are the largest ones. This is just this week, by the way. And so we know that these are slipping. These plates are slipping. Whenever they slip, there's an earthquake. When that earthquake happens, it relieves the slip. When you don't see any, that's a danger, because that means it's building up and it's ready to slip. So when I'm telling you about this fault line in the Cascadian subduction zone, which is right here, this is way overdue. This is scarier than this. This has already happened. This is building up energy to happen. That's why they believe a 9.5 is coming. And if it does, it's absolutely devastating. Let me give you a couple more charts on that so I can show you what I'm talking about. This is Indonesia. There's the Ring of Fire. Earthquakes and volcanoes happen simultaneously because it's magma under the planet's surface. And so these are the active volcanoes that are already spewing. Some of them are small, but they're already spewing. Look at all of them. And they're spewing right now. So that area is very, very hot for what's going on. This, again, will show you the fault line. This is the one that's going crazy right now, right up here from New Zealand all the way up to northern Australia, Indonesia, down by Japan, up to Russia, across the Bering Strait, down to Alaska, and it stops. Even though we know the fault line continues on, the earthquakes haven't come. So I'm not a predictor. I'm not somebody who's going to tell you that I'm prophesying it, but everything seems to show that California and Washington and Oregon are looking at an impending earthquake that's going to be absolutely devastating, and no government's going to be able to help it. So let me give you one last thing. Can I do that? All right, how many are still in the news tonight? This one came out from the Examiner. Year one list, 81 major Trump achievements, 11 Obama legacy items repealed. Now, I'm not going to read all of them to you, but I want to read some of them. With the passage of the GOP tax bill this week, the Trump administration has scored 81 major achievements in its first year, making good on campaign promises to provide significant tax cuts, boost U.S. energy production, and restore respect to the United States. Along the way, President Trump even outdid his own expectations and slashed at least 11 major legacy items from former President Barack Obama. The 81 accomplishments are in 12 major categories and include well over 100 other minor accomplishments. Jobs and economy. Here's just a couple of them. Passage of the tax reform bill providing $5.5 billion in cuts and repealing the Obamacare mandate. Increase of the GDP above 3%. When he said he was going to bring it above 3%, they laughed at him. I remember Wolf Blitzer saying he'll never get it above 1%. It's impossible. 3%. They thought it was impossible. We go on, creation of 1.7 million new jobs, cutting unemployment to 4.0%. Saw the Dow Jones reach record highs, a rebound in economic confidence to a 17-year high, prioritizing women-owned businesses for some 500 million women in SBA loans, killing jobs, stifling regulations, signed an executive order demanding that 2 regulations be killed for every new one that's created. I remember that. He's trying to pull down big government. I remember when he said he was going to do that. He said, I'm going to, for every new government regulation, I'm going to kill 2 of them. Well, he didn't do that. For every new one it's been created, he killed 16. So that's saved $8.1 billion. He's shrinking the government. Signed 15 congressional regulatory cuts. Withdrew from Obama-era Paris Climate Agreement, ending the threat of environmental regulations. Signed an executive order cutting the time for infrastructure permit approvals if a business wants to build. Eliminated an Obama rule on streams that Trump felt unfairly targeted the coal industry. Fair trade. Made good on his campaign promise to withdraw from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is horrible. Opened up the North American Free Trade Agreement for talks for better deal for the U.S., which he just signed for Canada and Mexico. Worked to bring companies back to the United States, and companies like Toyota, Mazda, Broadcom Limited, and Foxconn announced plans to open new U.S. plants. Made enforcement of U.S. trade laws, especially those that involve national security, a priority. Ended Obama's deal with Cuba, thankfully. Expanded energy infrastructure projects like the Keystone XL pipeline, snubbed by Obama. Ordered the Environmental Protection Agency to kill Obama's Clean Power Plan. EPA is reconsidering Obama's rules on methane emissions. Protecting the U.S. homeland. Laid out a new principle for reforming immigration and announced plan to end chain migration, which lets one legal immigrant to bring in dozens of family members. Ended the Obama-era catch and release of illegal immigrants. Obama started it. Boosted the arrest of illegals inside the United States. Removed 36% more criminal gang members than in fiscal 2016. Cracked down on some 300 sanctuary cities that defy ICE but get federal dollars. Protecting communities. Justice Department announced grants of $98 million to fund 802 new cops. Justice worked with Central American nations to arrest and charge 4,000 MS-13 members. Homeland rounded up nearly 800 MS-13 members, an 83% one-year increase. Signed 3 executive orders aimed at cracking down on international criminal organizations. Accountability. Trump has nominated 73 local federal judge and won his nomination of Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court, and he's pending another one right now. Called for a comprehensive plan to reorganize the executive branch. Called for a full audit of the Pentagon and its spending. The first president ever to audit the Pentagon. Ever. How many think they should have had it a long time ago? Combating opioids. First president declared a national public health emergency on opioids. His Council of Economic Advisors played a role in determining that overdoses are underreported as much as 24%. The Department of Health and Human Services laid out a new 5-point strategy to fight the crisis. Justice started a fraud crackdown, arresting more than 400. The administration added $500 million to fight the crisis. On National Drug Take-Back Day, the Drug Enforcement Agency of the United States collected, are you ready for this? 456 tons of drugs, illegal drugs. Protecting life. In his first week, Trump reinstated and expanded the Mexico City policy that blocks $9 billion in foreign aid being used for abortions in the United States. Worked with Congress on a bill overturning an Obama regulation that blocked states from defunding abortion providers. He says, now, if you want to defund abortion providers, you can go ahead and do it. Obama said no. Published guidance to block Obama money for supporting abortions. Helping veterans. Signed the Veteran Accountability and Whistleblower Protection Act to allow senior officials in the Department of Veterans Affairs to fire failing employees and establish safeguards to protect whistleblowers. Under Obama, they couldn't fire them. Signed the VA Choice and Quality Employment Act of 2017 to authorize $2.1 billion in additional funds for the veterans. Created a VA hotline. I'm not reading all of these to you, by the way. With VA Security Secretary David Solkin, he announced 3 initiatives to expand access to health care for veterans using telehealth technology. Promoted peace through strength. Directed the rebuilding of the military and ordered a new national strategy and nuclear posture review. Worked to increase defense spending. Empowered military leaders to seize the initiative and win, reducing the need for a White House sign-off on every mission. Directed the revival of the National Space Council to develop space war strategies. Elevated U.S. Cyber Command into a major warfighting command. Withdrew from the UN Global compact on migration, which Trump saw as a threat to borders, imposed a travel ban on nations that lack border and anti-terrorism security, saw ISIS lose virtually all of its territory, pushed for strong action against global outlaw North Korea and its development of nuclear weapons, announced a new Afghan strategy that strengthened support for U.S. forces at war with terrorism, approved a new Iran strategy plan focused on neutralizing the country's influence in the region, totally opposite of what Obama did, ordered missile strikes against a Syrian air base that used chemical weapons attack. Obama said, you use those chemical weapons, we're drawing a line in the sand. You use them, we're going to attack you. Well, they did use them, and he still didn't do anything about the line in the sand. Restoring confidence in and respect for America. Lastly, Trump won the release of American held abroad, often using his personal relationships with world leaders. Not to mention that dead POWs came back from North Korea. We got their bodies back after decades and decades, made good on a campaign promise to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Man, you can say what you want about Obama. I didn't read all. You can say what you want about Trump, but I'm going to tell you what. For all of his crassness and all of his rhetoric and all of his rambling, he is doing an amazing job as the President of the United States. I want you to know that. So that's in the news for tonight. I'm going to ask